Hey, friends. Friends? You're not my friends. You're my friendos. Hey, friendos. Steve here. Welcome back to the channel. So this past week marked the 25th anniversary of the NWO being formed at Bash of the Beach in 1996 when Hulk Hogan shocked the world of wrestling, brother, and turned heel and dropped 3 leg drops on Randy Savage, the Macho Man. Oh, no. So anyways, I thought it'd be fun to go back and look at some fan reactions to Bash of the Beach 1996, to the big reveal of Hulk Hogan being the third man, brother. When I say fan reactions, I don't mean this guy here.
Man coming in.
I had to clip a guy. Some fat drunk came underneath the bottom rope.
Nash and Halls beat the shit out of that guy. Anyways, I found a Reddit thread that was asking people about their experiences with the New World Order, the big reveal of Hulk Hogan. The question specifically is, who did people / fans think the third man of the Outsiders was in WCW before Hogan came out? And the thread has a bunch of people sort of giving their own recollections of the time, and I thought that'd be kind of fun to look at here. Before we get started, hey, do me a favor, give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button. I would very much appreciate it, brother. All right, so here I am on the Squared Circle Reddit thread. This is from a couple years ago, it was like 6 years ago. And just to give you a little bit of context from my own personal experience, I actually didn't start watching wrestling until about a year after Bash of the Beach in 1996. The NWO was already fully established. I started hanging out with Larson and Hilton and Jeff and all them, and they all watched wrestling, and I was like, oh, what is this shit? What do I have to now get into, just fit in with these guys? And their thing was wrestling. I was open to it. I started watching it with them. I was like, oh, this NWO stuff is kind of cool. Everybody's acting like jerks. That's kind of neat. And then like a year after that, I started watching WWF because of Stone Cold and et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm a wrestling podcaster. So my recollection is just that, and this is fairly recently, I thought people said that the alternate to Hulk Hogan was going to be Sting. Sting was like, yeah, I'll do it if Hogan doesn't want to do it. And apparently Hogan didn't really actually decide until the day of the event that he was going to do it. I think that was some of that was outlined in the Guy Evans Nitro book, which is a terrific book you should definitely check out. I don't read books very often. This thing is super thick, and I read the entire thing. It took me a couple months, but I did it. Anyways, this thread's kind of interesting. It starts off with this TruthBot user who asked, I was rewatching Bash of the Beach 96, and I know that Hogan was obviously a huge shock to most fans, but who did the average fan think was the third man? And what were the dirt sheets and message boards of the day saying who was going to be? He also said, I'm familiar with Sting and Bret Hart being discussed behind the scenes as potential candidates, but did the fans and or the smart fans think that as well? And some of these responses I thought were pretty interesting. This deleted user right here says, I wasn't using the internet at the time, so I hoped it was going to be Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart. I also didn't know wrestlers performed under contracts back then, so I thought a wrestler could go between WCW or WWF whenever he wanted. So in my mind, it was possible a third man being Hogan, though, was better than anything I could ask for. Nobody else could have done that. That's a pretty good point there. Tom Puppet said, I always thought it was going to be Lex Luger. That's what I was looking at. What is this? The Wrestling Observer at the time. I don't know if I'm allowed to actually show the Wrestling Observer because you're supposed to pay for this. But yeah, the Wrestling Observer at the time said, apparently the week prior to the show, they had actually said that it was going to be Hogan. Before that, PW Torch had considered that it was, or had figured that it was Lex Luger because of the way he had come into the WCW from the WWF at the time. It would have made sense for him to have been the third man. And I think a lot of people thought that as well, that Luger would just turn on his own teammates and join the Outsiders. But obviously that didn't happen. Luger did eventually join the NWO. This deleted user right here says, I was a kid at the time, so I was excited and hopeful they were bringing another guy from WWE to invade like Shawn Michaels. Didn't see the pay-per-view, but the next night couldn't believe Hogan was the third man. Yeah, man, not everybody could afford pay-per-views. So like you just watch Nitro the next night and see Hogan wearing all black and you're like, holy crap. I like this right here. Gravy9 says, back when I was watching in that era, it was something like this: Hogan, Bret Hart, Sting, and Luger. He says most people's money was on Hogan, but when it happened, we still didn't believe it. This response here from Zombie 004 says most people didn't suspect any of those names other than Hart. Michaels and Sid were also high on the list. I didn't realize, what is this, July of 96? So after that big WrestleMania, Bret Hart was not under contract. I guess that makes some sense because I think he was out of contract, or his contract was up back in like 92 as well or something. So maybe that makes sense. Let's see here. Gravy says most people did. I lived it. So he says most people did think that was all these names on the list were possibilities. He says Michaels was nowhere near the list. I don't recall ever hearing about Sid, just sort of in the years that I became a fan. He's Zombie 04 says, I lived it too. Michaels was a top choice. Remember, we were expecting people to jump ship. Hogan, Luger, and Sting were already there. So there's a little bit of back and forth there between old ass wrestling fans like me. Big Mata says Ric Flair. That's the first time I've heard Ric Flair's name. The Reverend Jim Ignatowski says the internet wrestling community was vastly smaller back then. Hell, the internet itself was a whole lot smaller and slower back then. I remember thinking that it would be another top guy who was leaving WWF, but I had no idea. Revolution Blues here says, without knowing what they said on the dirt sheets, I tried to figure it out based on the pattern. I like this because it's like somebody doing some detective work here. Let me try to get this so you guys can see it. He says both Hall and Nash were in WCW immediately prior to joining WWF, and both had success in the WWF. So it had to be somebody who knew the inner workings of WCW, who was successful in WWF and yet to debut in WCW. And he has this big ass list. This list I came up with was The Undertaker, Sid, Triple H, Goldust. Steve Austin had just literally found success in WWE at the time. King of the Ring, I think, was like the month prior to this. Mankind and Vader. He says, I eliminated Sid, Austin, and Mankind because they didn't come immediately from WCW, and I eliminated Triple H because at the time he wasn't big enough to make a splash. He says, I couldn't really picture Goldust or Taker joining NWO, so I settled on Vader. And look, it's got the little Vader face right there too. So that's interesting. So here we go. Mike Farquhar says, well, Dave Meltzer reported the week before that it was going to be Hogan in The Observer. But up until then, I wasn't really sure who could make the impact. I was a Bret fan, so I didn't want him to actually go to WCW, but no one else could really go due to their contract situation. Another vote here from TM Cottle says it was going to be Ric Flair. It kind of made sense. He had done similar things before. It was WCW after all. 500 Days and Nights says, looking back, there's no way it would have worked with anyone other than Hogan or some major name jumping ship like Bret Hart. Turning Sting just wouldn't have worked, and Luger or Savage just would have been just too expected to really shock anybody. I think that the only other name, that people are talking about really that could have been like a major deal would have been Bret Hart. That'd have been really interesting. I guess apparently his contract was up at the time, but then his contract was up like the next year is mid to late 96 when he signed that like massive 10-year deal that McMahon then had to go back on. Is that what happened there? Maybe somebody can let me know in the comments. I could just look it up, but I'm not going to in the middle of the video. I could totally edit this out too, but I'm not going to. Let's see here. JS's Wrestling Meme says, I remember thinking Sting. I also remember thinking that didn't make much sense. He'd be a WCW guy helping the invasion, not a true outsider. To put it into perspective for those who aren't watching then, if you think the streak ending was shocking, and it was, multiply that by 10 for Hogan's turn. You just couldn't fathom what it would be like after all those years. And despite the boom not quite hitting until a year or so later, everybody was talking about it. And account of that, Lord Mandinga here says La Parka. Here we go. Corrier says, according to Bischoff's book, which I'll be honest, I would take with a grain of salt, because I feel like Bischoff just sort of tells things the way he wants them to be. He says this: Hogan refused to be part of the organization with no name yet because the merchandising, movies, and shit. He was invited to Hogan's house when a Hulkster turned down the third man. He showed Bischoff the door saying, I have to pick my kids at school. I thought I remember reading in the Guy Evans book that Hogan said something like, until you've walked in the yellow and red boots, you'll never understand. It says Bischoff talked to Sting and he said yes because he's a good worker. And Bischoff says he owes a lot to Sting. He says 1 or 2 weeks before Bash at the Beach, Hogan calls Bischoff to a movie location and says, I'm the third man, brother. This person says, the time I was thinking it was going to be Bret Hart. Never in my wildest dreams that I think it was going to be Hogan. It just never seemed plausible to me at the time. He said, I remember 16-year-old me. I love this kind of stuff. He says, I remember 16-year-old me completely in shock over the incident. I saw Hogan come out and I was like, oh, yes, Hogan's going to teach these guys a lesson. And when the turn happened and the leg drop came down, I stood there in pure disbelief over what I was seeing. I couldn't fathom what was going on as I had never seen a heel turn so unexpected. I guess it was different back then. I really wasn't on the internet yet, so I had no clue about the workings of how things went backstage. I knew it was staged, and that was it. I hated the Outsiders after that. I hated Hogan. I hated what was happening. But I guess in hindsight, that was what they were shooting for. It changed the wrestling world forever. And I will always remember that moment. Whisker Biscuit says, I'm surprised more people aren't saying HBK. The curtain call incident wasn't long before, so the Smarks knew about the click. Plus, he was known for being a dick, and a surprise jump to WCW to join his friends would have been exactly the sort of thing he'd have done. And then this person responds with, the main reason people aren't saying HBK is because he was the WWF champion at the time. That makes sense. Blue Beards Elite says, maybe a bit late to be seeing an answer, but why wasn't Ric Flair seen as a legitimate choice? This person says, wasn't he part of the Horsemen as a heel at the time? If that was the case, it wouldn't have been a very interesting turn. So I don't know. That's pretty interesting. Oh, here we go. Look, this is a good internet reference from Pete F3 says, I was on Prodigy at the time. You guys remember Prodigy? I'm old, so I kind of remember that. He says, many people believed with strong support that it would in fact be Hogan, but much of the Prodigy community were hardly casual fans. Still, Hogan turning was definitely one of those believe it when you see it deals. I never heard about Sting until the Plan B story came out after the fact. I don't think any fans seriously considered him as a possibility going into the show. Luger, yes, it would have fit in with his two-faced character. He says, I'll throw out 2 other names that were genuinely, truly speculated on. Mabel and Tatanka. He said, aside from Brett, they were the 2 most visible guys who have just left. I think there was a rumor also that Mabel was reported by the Observer as being somebody that was thrown around as a possibility backstage. So interesting stuff. Here, we'll finish with this story. This is nice. Disc Gateway says, I was only 11. Kayfabe was alive and well for me. I honestly thought everything that Hall and Ash was doing was real. Hogan joining downright broke my heart. I didn't have a clue who it was. It didn't help matters that my papa was a 66-year-old man that would fist fight you if you told him wrestling was fake. Funny story time. In 1978, a local wrestling promotion came to town. Well, Papa's favorite wrestler lost. What's a grown man to do? He threatened to blow up the fairgrounds if they didn't restart the match. Then when one of the wrestlers told him it was fake, he punched him in the throat, told him quit taking up for the guy who won. He says, we both cried that night. 96 to 98 was the best 2 years in wrestling for me. I'd give anything to watch WrestleMania 30 with my papa. I know he would have loved it. Oh, that's a really sweet story. His dad threatened to blow up the fairgrounds. Wow. Anyways, that's going to do it for this trip down memory lane. That was kind of fun. I like historical stuff like that. I ask my dad sometimes because he used to catch the wrestling shows back in like the mid 70s, late to mid 70s, like before, it was a couple years before I was born, a couple years before my sister was born, here in Sacramento, the Memorial Auditorium, where they ran like AWA Big Time Wrestling, I think that's what they called it. And so like Pat Patterson was there, a couple other guys. And I asked him, I was like, Dad, did everybody know it was fake back then? He was like, yeah, everybody knew it was fake. So out here, in Northern California, according to my dad, everybody knew that it was fake. So, anyways, that's going to do it. Check out one of these other videos over here. If there are any other incidents you'd like to go back and revisit via fan reactions of the time, let me know in the comments below. This was kind of fun. It was kind of easy to do, too. All I got to do is look at Reddit. Anyways, thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you later.